Willkommen zurück. Bevor ich auf Englisch wechsle für unsere nächsten 4 Speaker, möchte ich noch dazu sagen, schicken Sie ruhig die Fragen aufs Handy, auch auf Deutsch. Ich übersetze das gerne, das ist überhaupt kein Problem, wem das lieber ist. Our next speaker, Matthew Griffin. He's recognized as one of the world's foremost futurists. He'll be talking about the future of artificial intelligence. Matthew Griffin helps investors, multinationals, regulators and sovereign governments around the world to envision, build and lead the future. Aside from being a member of Centrica's prestigious Technology and Innovation Committee and mentoring X-Prize teams, he re-envisions global education and training with the G20 and helps the world's largest organizations to envision and ideate the future of their products, services, industries and even countries. He's an award-winning futurist and the founder of the 311 Institute. Matthew's ability to identify, track and explain the impacts of hundreds of revolutionary technologies emerging technologies on global culture, industry and society is unparalleled. Please, a warm welcome for Matthew Griffin.
Thank you very much. So have you all had your coffee? Excellent. Have you all heard about the latest molecular coffee? So if you bear in mind, Anders was talking about environmental impacts. Coffee has actually got quite a high environmental impact. So over in the US, basically, startups now produced molecular coffee, which apparently is better than Starbucks. So there are lots and lots of different solutions to some of the environmental problems that we have. So my name's Matthew Griffin. I'm actually a strategic advisor, but a lot of organizations call me a futurist because it's convenient. I look at 2 types of futures. I look at near futures, so that's 0 to 20 years out. That's where most multinational organizations and investors look, typically in the sort of 5 to 10 year range. If you're a sovereign government, though, and I work with the vast majority of the G20, I work with 4 prime ministers, typically your range of view starts 20 years out. Because if you're a sovereign country like Germany, United States, Canada, UAE, UK, whoever it happens to be, typically, if you're building a country, you want to understand what the future of infrastructure looks like, the future of transportation, energy, jobs, skills, all kinds of things. And so that's why I go 20 to 50 years out. But the further out that you go, and the wider your purview, the fuzzier everything gets. But today we're going to be talking about the future of artificial intelligence, and that's the picture that I chose for the future of artificial intelligence. And you're probably wondering why, but I'm going to explain that one later. There's no robots or digital code notice. So I work with a whole variety of different organizations because when we have a look at disruption, when we have a look at the way that technology is transforming not just the world, and it is transforming every single corner of every single industry and every single part of our society faster than ever before. So for example, with Airbus are now increasingly looking into building the future of flying taxis. When we have a look at Area 2071, Area 2071 is a UAE government initiative to build the Dubai of 2071, because that's their centenary. When we have a look at organizations like Centrica, increasingly the energy industry is being disrupted. So more and more energy organizations like RWE or whoever it happens to be are increasingly thinking about selling their energy generation assets, particularly as we start moving away from fossil fuels. And we have some, I'm also going, based on what Anders said earlier, I'm going to show you a pathway to reduce global greenhouse gas emissions by about 60 to 70%. We already have those technologies here. Implementation is then the next problem. Increasingly, we have organizations like Dentons. Dentons are increasingly using robo-lawyers. So JP Morgan, for example, recently used artificially intelligent lawyers to eliminate 400,000 man-hours of contract work. And then when we have a look at organizations basically like Huawei and Samsung, it's things like the future of the devices that you hold. So when we have a look at the smartphone, the problem that we have moving from this format to the next thing, I can miniaturize the compute, the connectivity, and the storage, and I can put that onto a belt buckle or a brooch. But while we have technologies today that will help us move the display, if I put the display into an set of augmented reality glasses, virtual reality headset, e-ink on your arm, if I put it onto a Pico projector on the wall, the problem we have moving from this format to the next format is what display will you all culturally accept and adopt? If you can find that display, you've unlocked the future, basically, of these devices. I also work with organizations like T-Mobile, basically on 5G. So when we have a look at the impact that 5G is going to have on smart cities, but also the real estate industry, basically that's going to be pivotal. I also work with organizations like Legal & General. So increasingly, Legal & General have over $1.2 trillion in assets. And on the one hand, you can either encourage organizations to do the right thing, simply by using shareholder votes, or hopefully organizations will do the right thing because they want to. So Anders earlier talked about a lot of organizations putting shareholders first. Over in the US, there was a meeting of the Business Council. It was the Fortune 250's top CEO, Fortune 250 CEOs. The vast majority of those CEOs have voted to end a rule called shareholder primacy, which was a 1990s rule that put shareholders first and put short-term returns first. As we start to see the breakdown of shareholder primacy, increasingly we have more organizations that are now trying to look at how they prepare themselves for the actual future, not just this quarter, this year, the next 5 years. And in fact, I'm working with more and more organizations that are looking 20 to 50 years out. Organizations like Huawei and Henkel and a whole variety of others. So there's lots and lots of change. Every single industry is changing, including the real estate industry. If you think about electric vehicles, for example, if you have property that is next to a motorway or next to a busy road, electric vehicles will reduce the noise and reduce the pollution levels. Does the value of your real estate increase? There's all sorts of questions. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to be talking through a couple of technologies. But you can go to my website, it's 311institute.com. You can download this codex, because what I'm not going to be talking about are the 395 other exponential technologies that are changing every single aspect of your lives, professionally, individually, and your industries and your countries. And by the way, who's actually natively from Austria? Yeah, do you want a little fact about Austria? From an innovation perspective, yeah? So Austria recently teamed up with China and has now developed the first quantum internet and quantum communications platform. Quantum communications are the future of communications and the internet. They are thought to be unhackable. And there you go. And Austria actually is one of the leading countries for quantum technologies. And quantum technologies in the future are awesome. They are hundreds of millions of times faster than anything we have today. So this is a little slide. So if you want to understand the technologies that are going to be on the Starburst, I'll show you later. This is the type of card. It'll give you a quick 2-minute view, basically, of what's going on. So how many of you love politicians? You know, when we keep running elections, when we're voting, how many of you struggle to think which human politician you'll vote for? Yeah. So over in China, so as we start having a look at the future of artificial intelligence now, China in 2018 created an artificial intelligent politician in the foreign ministry. This particular AI actually is an advisor that advises them on the best way to negotiate with countries. So this artificial intelligence, when they go into a negotiation with a particular country or whatever they're negotiating on, will scan all of the information and say, if you ask for this, we don't think they'll give that to you. If you ask for this in return for this, we think you'll get that. So AI politicians are increasingly coming to China. The US is also going down this route, but China's ahead. So in the future, will you be voting for an artificial intelligent politician? Similarly, though, when we start talking about artificial intelligent politicians, as opposed to naturally intelligent politicians, if an AI starts ruling a country, bearing in mind that AI is already being embedded throughout the fabric of China, for example, if that AI isn't benign, you end up with an immortal dictator. Because AI doesn't die. You can't turn it off. So there we go. Little fun fact. So if I ask you today, how many of you think or feel that today we're moving faster than we did 10 years ago as a society or as individuals? Hands up. Excellent. Does anyone think we're moving slower? No. If I move forward 10 years and ask you the same question, do you think you're going to be moving faster as an industry, as individuals, especially in 10 years' time, or slower from a technology perspective and a change perspective? Yeah, faster, right? One of the main reasons for that is if I went back about 10 to 20 to 30 years and asked you what you could do with technology next year that you can't do with technology this year, you might look at Moore's Law and computers and think, well, computer chips are getting faster and they're getting cheaper. So I could probably ingest, analyze more data, and I could do X, Y, and Z with that data. The issue that you have today as businesses and as individuals is this. So as you're starting to digitize your businesses, bearing in mind that just digital transformation eliminates all of the individual boundaries between all of the individual industries. You know, if you go and have a conversation with a retailer and say, what industry are you in? They will say retail. Have a conversation with a bank and say, what industry are you in? They will say, we are a bank, obviously. You can have a conversation with a technology company like Google, Baidu, Alibaba, Tencent, whoever it happens to be, and say, what industry are you in? Even Facebook. And they'll go, all of them. We're in healthcare, retail, finance, technology, search, whatever. And part of the reason for that is, on the one hand, digitization destroys all of the individual silos that we sort of see between industries. But on top of that, so are you digitizing your businesses? Are you then moving your businesses to the cloud? In addition to that, do you have a point of view on 5G, on the impact that 5G is going to have on your industry? Do you have an understanding of how artificial intelligence, for example, is going to affect how you manage your properties, as well as a whole variety of other things? Blockchain. Do you have a point of view on blockchain? Do you have an understanding of how blockchain could simplify basically your asset management systems and your repairs and your operations? Are you using robotics? Are you using augmented reality or virtual reality? Are you using virtual reality and digital twins basically to manage your retail, your residential estates, or your factories, or whatever it happens to be? And at this point, you kind of come to me basically and you say, we're struggling to get our head around all these different things, let alone how we combine them all together, let alone how we future-proof our own organization to take advantage of all these things. And then meanwhile, you have a load of startups coming out from under you, basically, who are just doing this natively. So this all accelerates the pace of change. It's not one technology. In fact, it's not just 8 or 9 technologies. Basically, there's a lot more. When we have a look at the rate of change as well, from an adoption perspective, you'll have seen this probably a lot of times. About 100, 120 years ago, basically, in order for the telephone to get to 50 million users, it took 75 years. If you think we're increasingly digitizing our planet, we are increasingly connected. Today, we have 3.5 billion people connected on the planet. We have 12,000 low Earth orbit satellites going into space now that will connect the other 3.5 billion people over the next 10 years. When you have a look at Pokemon Go was adopted by 50 million people in 19 days. Call of Duty was adopted by 100 million people in 7 days. So if you're now in an investment capacity, at what point, once you've built your digital product, at what point do we see a multi-billion-dollar business built in a day? Because if I build my product, if I can push it out and I can hit the right levers, and I get 100 million people to use it, 500 million people to use it, all of a sudden, I'm now getting to the point where I can disrupt a global industry at scale in a day. Everything is getting faster. And one of the problems that this leaves us humans is this. On the one hand, if you sort of go back and talk to your grandparents, they'd have a new technology or a new thing coming through once every 5, 10 years, maybe. They'd have time to get their heads around all of this technological development and all these new products and services and things. As all of this gets faster, the amount of time that we have as people to try to get our heads around what is this, understand it, get a point of view, understand the implications of it, it's already changed. Our period to get a point of view and understand and kind of get comfortable with this stuff is shortening, which is why we're seeing an increase basically in the amount of mental health issues around the world. But I mentioned 8 technologies on my little slide earlier. There aren't 8, and this is in the codex. There are over 400 exponential technologies. There are 25 general-purpose technologies, and a general-purpose technology is a technology like artificial intelligence where you can use it to change many industries. It's got millions of use cases, and you can do lots of innovation on top of it. There are 25 things like AI. Some of them are odd, and I'm not going to go through them. One of the odd ones is carbon nanotubes, which can solve paralysis, can create terahertz computers, can create space elevators, new aerospace materials, and all sorts of things, as well as give electric vehicles a 16,000-kilometer range. So when we start, so in terms of, we'll sort of try and save the planet a little bit. If you have a look at advanced manufacturing, bioreactors, number 7. Bioreactors are an interesting technology because we're told by the United Nations that in 2050 we will have 11 billion people on the planet. We will all be fighting wars because there will not be enough food, and or millions or billions will be starving. Bioreactors solve global famine. We already have the technology today. You can buy the results. What we do is we take the stem cell from an animal. You could do it from a cow, a duck, a chicken. You put it into a bioreactor, you apply some hormones, and you grow meat. It's not plant meat. It's not artificial meat. It is meat. Salmon, tuna, duck, chicken. At the moment, basically, these meats, they've been approved by the FDA over in the US for sale in Walmart. These meats cost about $363 per pound. So you can grow fillet steak in a bioreactor. At $363 a pound, it's too expensive for most people to buy. But 5 years ago, it was $1 million per pound. Technology drops the cost of everything. In another 5 years' time, clean meat, as it's known, will end up sitting at around $15 a pound, at which point I can now start saying to you, would you like to have meat from an actual animal? By the way, cows are killing the planet. That's 20% of global greenhouse gas emissions right there. And also, we're deforesting the Amazon so we can have cattle grazing on the pastures. Or would you like this environmentally friendly meat? So, bioreactors, each one of these technologies can change either one industry or every industry. Every dot represents maturity, and each one of these individual technologies has got a total addressable market of about $500 billion. If we have a look at biotech, so Aubrey will be talking about life extension and life later. One of my little favorite ones is in vivo gene editing. Today, if you are born with an inherited genetic disease, we can use a technology called CRISPR. It's a gene editing tool. We had a person basically with Hunter's syndrome over in the US. If you're born with Hunter's syndrome, there's good news and bad news. The good news is that you will die in 20 years' time. The bad news is that you will die painfully throughout that 20 years. So scientists over in the US put this guy on an intravenous drip for about half an hour. The gene editing tool went into his body, found the bad gene, clipped in a good gene. He no longer has Hunter's syndrome. You can apply that same technology to start curing 6,000 uncurable genetic inherited conditions today. Energy. When we have a look at, for example, photovoltaics. Today, if you have a property and you go to, say, for example, IKEA or a commercial solar panel company, solar panels are about 17% efficient. The record for silicon solar panels from an efficiency perspective is 27%. Perscovite goes to 32%. If you use gene-edited bacteria, you get to 50%. And if you use carbon nanotubes to reclaim the heat in a solar panel, you have a solar panel that is 80% efficient. That's why a lot of the energy giants basically are now running scared. So from an energy perspective, energy, about 67% of the world's energy is produced from fossil fuels. We have a pathway to curb 30% of global greenhouse gas emissions. Fossil fuels is dead, basically, when it comes basically to this sort of stuff. And then we go around and we'll talk about the intelligence piece. Smart materials, if you have real estate, we have self-healing concrete. It absorbs carbon dioxide from the air, and it will fix the cracks in the concrete. There's all sorts of things. And this doesn't just apply basically to, say, your industries or the industries you're interested in. These apply to every industry. But don't think about individual technologies. Think about combinations. So, and all that's in the codex. So when we start having a look at today's digital world, there's this dirty little secret. So on the one hand, if we digitize our planet and digitize our products and services, firstly, I can sell products to you as a service. Secondly, you no longer need to go to the bank in your car and use fossil fuels or diesel or whatever it happens to be to go and do a bank transaction. You can just do that online. However, as we start looking at digitizing our planet, blockchain, in the past 5 years, the energy usage of blockchain technology has gone through the roof. It now represents, if blockchain was a country, it would be using more electricity than Sweden. It's ranked about number 8 now. That's gone vertical. 80% of that blue line, so we're now drawing about 7.5 gigawatts of electricity usage for blockchain. About 80% of that is Bitcoin. That's a problem. That's unsustainable. When you have a look at the amount of energy and compute power that it's taking to train artificial intelligence today, AI is actually an old technology. You can see that's pretty much going vertical as well. So in terms of computing power, we are now using, we're using about 10 trillion petaflops of compute power. To put that into perspective, the US's largest supercomputer is a supercomputer called Summit. That sits down here. The computational and electrical cost, basically, of training artificial intelligence is going through the roof. And that line will be going vertical very soon. It's already starting to go vertical. So what we have is we've got a whole bunch of problems. So from an artificial intelligence perspective, the amount of computational power that it's taking us to train AIs has increased by 300,000-fold in 7 years. It's doubling every 3.4 months. Now, bearing in mind the line's getting more vertical, it's going to be doubling every month. It's going to be doubling every week. So that just keeps going. That keeps getting bad, particularly as models get more complex. And then blockchain is already using more 19 times more electricity than the global solar capacity, and 56 times more than all the hydro capacity on the planet. Unsustainable. But from a technology perspective, we do actually have some answers. Just like many things, basically, we have lots of problems, but we also have lots of answers. If you use the next generation GPU, something called an intelligence processing unit, we can train artificial intelligence models 100 times faster, but for 90% less electricity. So that's one. We can create lean artificial intelligence models, and then we have neuromorphic computers that are coming through as well. And a neuromorphic computer can pack as much power as today's biggest supercomputer, which is a 2,000 petaflop system with the US Department of Energy, which fills rooms many, many times this size. A neuromorphic computer will pack a supercomputer onto the size of a thumbnail, but you can power that thumbnail-sized supercomputer with a AA battery. If you think about your brain has got neuromorphic computers are based on the human brain. You have a huge amount of computing power in your head, but I don't see you plugged into the electrical grid. Your brain uses about the energy equivalents of about 2 AA batteries. It's highly efficient. That's a neuromorphic computer in techno jargon. And then from a blockchain perspective, we have minerless blockchains which don't need the hashing, so that's where we get rid of a lot of energy usage there. Proof of authority from companies like Microsoft, and then we could always switch fossil fuel-based electricity to renewables. Now, from an artificial intelligence perspective, we already have AIs that are designing themselves, coding themselves. So on the design front, Google's AIs can now design better neural networks than their top human experts, and they're about 30% better. We have supercomputers that are designing neural networks 99% faster than the best human experts. We have self-coding artificial intelligences from Google and Microsoft. They're called Bayou and DeepCoder, respectively, that you can talk to and you can say, build me either an artificial intelligence model or build me a program, and they will go off and they'll scavenge GitHub, Stack Overflow, bring the code back, compile it, and say, is that the application that you wanted? They only do it with 5 or 100 lines of code at the moment. When you get to programs that have 10,000 lines of code, that's a game changer. In addition to that, we already have self-evolving artificial intelligences. So one artificial intelligence from OpenAI learnt how to learn. And this self-evolving AIs are actually quite scary because, for example, in OpenAI's case, when people went to them and said, so fantastic, you've managed to create a zero-day learning artificial intelligence that can train itself without the need for a human or human intervention. That's game-changing, revolutionary. How did you do it? The experts at OpenAI, and OpenAI just received a $1 billion grant from Microsoft. They're not a little tin pot company. When we don't know. Facebook's AIs evolved to collaborate and collude with one another. Google's artificial intelligences learnt a new language. So they started communicating in a new language. Then they encrypted that, so humans couldn't actually eavesdrop on them. Elsewhere, basically, we have self-evolving AIs, again from OpenAI, that there was one that was supposed to count, and suddenly it learned maths. So we are already seeing AIs that essentially break their programming and evolve by themselves. That's an issue. We also have self-replicating AIs. Google's AIs recently created child AIs, and so on and so on and so on. So AI is quite a crazy term. However, what we see we see artificial intelligence basically as kind of this ghost in the machine. The computer says no when you want a loan. This is increasingly one of the faces of artificial intelligence. This is a lady called Eva from a company called Soul Machines. She's something called a digital human. And as a digital human, she has a neural network mind. She can hear you using natural language, she can read your emotions, and she can respond in natural language. She's a digital human. And if you're a Fortune 100 CEO, there are 5 Fortune 100 CEOs that are digitizing themselves using this type of avatar technology, so that when they die, the Fortune 100 companies that they represent can literally just dial them up and say, we're doing an M&A at the moment. John, we'd like your advice. We know you died 20 years ago, but what are your thoughts? So these are a path to immortality, and there are a couple of companies actually starting there. So that's a weird one, frankly, but here we go. So this is Will. Think of all the quirks, basically, and everything else, they're getting ironed out.
Hi, I'm Will. I work at Vector helping young people learn about renewable energy. Here's what happened when I met some students for the first time. I can help you become an energy expert. What should we start with?
Geothermal genius.
Magma from the Earth's core comes closer to the surface and we end up with volcanoes, hot springs and geysers. But do you know what magma is?
Molten rock from the outer core.
Absolutely right.
I thought Will was really, fantastic.
Like he's there looking at us. It's like a real human.
Here's a quick question for you. What do you think is the windiest city in the world?
Wellington.
Nice. If the sun is so far away, how long do you think it takes sunlight to reach us?
10 minutes.
Correct. You're a solar superstar. I was curious if they liked me.
It's different from talking to Will than talking to Siri, for example, because
he's there. You can see him.
He was quite human-like, even though he's an AI.
Then, the human version of me arrived.
How's it going? Was it cool? Yeah, it was cool. We got some really good reactions out of a few kids.
Is that him?
Yeah.
That's really cool.
Yeah. A couple of them didn't recognise me straight away. You know, it's me, eh?
Oh, yeah, true. I can see that now.
It's a bit of a shock seeing my digital avatar for the first time. It's like looking in the mirror, I guess.
Let's face it, he may look like me, but I'm the one who knows about energy.
Yeah, I think Will could be used as an education tool in many areas.
We did learn some things that we didn't know.
Wellington is the windiest city.
I learned that you wouldn't notice if the sun went away for 10 minutes.
It's not just a blank screen they're staring at answering questions, so they feel like they're actually interacting with a human.
He was a good teacher.
It was great meeting the thinkers of tomorrow, because together we can shape our energy future.
So Will doesn't have pre-programmed answers. He's a neural network. He's taught 250,000 children basically about renewable energy. He's also selling mortgages in the UK. If you have a Mercedes, he's also going to be popping up basically in your customer services dashboards. However, when we start taking some of these different technologies together, so don't just think about artificial intelligence, think about how you combine it with different technologies. That's the secret key to unlocking a lot of this stuff. We already have fully autonomous companies coming out of Wall Street and Hong Kong. So in Hong Kong, there is a hedge fund called IDA, which is a fully autonomous hedge fund with a couple of $100 million under management, and it is run by an artificial intelligence. Bridgewater Associates, $160 billion basically under asset. They are trying to fully automate their entire organization. Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan, basically they are also following suit, but they're much bigger organizations. So fully autonomous companies are already here. There are about 15, but again, all these things start down here, then you get more and more and more and more of them. As you start projecting out over time, you'll be competing against fully autonomous companies. Think Uber, it's a transaction system. That's perfect to automate. So I want to take you through how we use some of these technologies from a human perspective to start unlocking creativity. So on the one hand, for example, basically we've got robo-writers now. This is again from OpenAI. It's the world's most dangerous text generator. It's so dangerous that they didn't want to release it. What you do is you type a couple of lines of code, a couple of lines in. So you type the first sentence. You can go online. You can try this for yourself. You type in the first sentence. It will complete the rest of it, or the rest of the essay, the article, the news article, the report, whatever you want to do. So on the other hand, basically these types of platforms basically help accelerate science and healthcare, because these types of tools can go off, ingest huge amounts of information, and the CIA use this, or this type of technology, and it will summarize it. So if you think about cancers, one of the biggest problems that doctors have now basically is keeping up basically with all the latest developments in cancer research. They can't read 2,500 papers. These things basically will summarize everything for them and say, here you go, this is what you need to know. We also have another AI that just wrote a book, the world's first artificially intelligent novel, and it was about lithium-ion batteries. It's 200 pages long. It's an absolute read. So, yeah, these things are getting a lot better.
Let's try and darken that
But
up.
how many of you are crappy artists? Really, really bad.
What if we were to change all that to rock?
Okay, let's click on rock, and we gotta replace the mountain.
Let's try waterfall just by pulling water down from the top there.
Okay.
Could you draw the thing on the right or your left?
Wouldn't it be great if everybody could be an artist? If we could take our ideas and turn them into compelling images? This technology allows us to create a smart paintbrush so that if you wanted to create a new picture, you can just draw the shapes of the objects that you want, and the neural network can then fill in all the details. If we add a water feature, the network is able to add reflections, not because we told it that, but because it learned it. Or if we change the ground to be covered in snow, then it knows that the sky also needs to be a different color. I really think this technology is going to be great for architects, designers, people making virtual worlds to train robots and self-driving cars. The input to this model is something we call a segmentation map. It's like a coloring book picture that describes here's where a tree is, here's where the sky is, here's where the ground is, and it doesn't have any details. And then the neural network is able to fill in all of the texture and shadows and the colors based on things that it's learned from a large database of real-world images.
I would like to see that tree reflecting in that pond.
The real advance here is that we're able to synthesize images with a lot more diversity and more fidelity than we were able to in the past. I really think this technology is going to be great for the dreamers of the world.
So at the moment, that technology allows you just to draw a crappy picture and it'll translate it into a photo. Now, the resolution's low. However, you couldn't do that 2 years ago. You fast forward another 2 years, basically, and that's going to, the resolution of those pictures that you create basically will be perfect. The impact of that on Shutterstock basically is immeasurable. And in fact, Shutterstock, there are already organizations that are using that type of technology to provide stock images for free, and people haven't taken any of the photos. However, how many of you would just like to create a video, but you can't hire a camera crew, you don't have the right setting? This is from Stanford and Princeton. There's a second-generation version out of this now. This is what we call text to video. So if you want to create a video, and this technology is getting faster and better, think faster and better. You're looking at this stuff, you're thinking, it looks small, looks short, basically looks junk. You couldn't do this 3 years ago. Now you can type, basically create a video of a man playing golf, and in the middle you can see that that does look like a golfer. As these AIs learn more, consume more information, the output that they generate is higher definition. And it's longer, it's better, it's bigger, it's lower cost. And then similarly, when we start talking about artificial intelligence, how many of you would simply, well, rather than picking up a crayon or rather than typing, how many of you would like to create images just by sitting there because you're really lazy? Is anyone really, really lazy? So you can't be that lazy because you put your hand up. So everyone else is. You are all really, really lazy. It's great. What about this? So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to combine brain-machine interfaces. Remember, technology combinations equal weird thing. I'm going to combine a brain technology interface, a non-invasive brain-machine interface with artificial intelligence. The artificial intelligence basically is going to read the brain waves, and then it's going to read your mind. And if you have children, in about 5 years' time, they could stream their mind to YouTube. So what we have here is we have volunteers who are looking at geometric shapes on the left. The artificial intelligence is reading their brain waves to recompile those images, which you can then stream to any social media platform of your choice. Now, again, while these images look crappy, 3 years ago, you couldn't do this. However, fast forward out 3 years, let alone 5 years, and this will be much, much higher resolution. But don't let it be forgotten that what we are doing here is we are reading information from billions of human synapses in real time to produce these images. So now you can just think of a video you want to create, think of an image you want to create, and it'll appear. This is a new one, though. So that one was volunteers basically watching static images. This is out of a Russian lab. If you look at this here, and then you look at the top, we've now moved that technology on. Within the space of about 6 months, we've gone from relatively static images. This person basically has got a brain-machine interface on their head. That information, their brain waves are being fed into an artificial intelligence. And while they're watching the video, the AI is trying to recompile what it sees. Now, a lot of the videos basically that you see up there basically look rubbish. But you can see that that's at least a face. We are using artificial intelligence to get inside your head, literally. If you're in healthcare, we're already using these technologies to help you communicate with loved ones. If you are paralyzed, if you have ALS, which is locked-in syndrome, these have real-world applications. But in order to get to this point, to show you a rubbishy image, we have to crack the secrets of the mind. neuroscientists basically have to understand basically how we represent images in our heads. We need to train AI models. There's a lot of science basically that goes into just creating this thing here for your entertainment. However, when we start looking at the acceleration, increasingly artificial intelligence is not just the tool that we use. It's also becoming the creator. So typically you think of, if you want to go and innovate a product, you get a human to go and innovate a product, whether it's a chair, a jet engine, an aircraft, whatever it happens to be. When we start putting sensors into products, whether it's a chair, a floor, basically whether it's an aircraft, we can take information from those sensors, pass them back to an artificial intelligence, and the AI will design a better product. But it will do it in about 99% less time.
What if you could come up with thousands of options for a single design without drawing, all of which meet specific goals set by the designer? And from those options, pick the one design that delivers on the most important criteria, the design you couldn't possibly have imagined. This is generative design, a technology that harnesses massive computing power, creating forms with precise amounts of material only where needed, achieving maximum performance while wasting nothing. But generative design can be about much more than simply turning out alternatives. Prototypes can be scanned and equipped with sensors that provide real-time performance data that can be looped back into the design process, so the object, in effect, co-designs itself. And depending on the material and method of manufacture chosen, the software can optimize the design for those choices. The things that have limited us in the past, software, materials, manufacturing, no longer do so. With generative design, the world can look and perform any way we want it to. This is the next stage in the evolution of design, and it's happening now.
So these creative machines are good at iterative innovation. They take an existing product generally, and they are able to innovate product version number 2 by taking a whole variety of, whole set of information, basically, and then creating the next product. This is the world's first self-evolving, self-manufacturing robot. Exactly the same principle. Think the principle. Don't think about the fact that you're looking at a slightly old robot. What we have here is we have a robot basically with sensors in its arms. We've given it the task of moving from one side of the studio to the other as quickly as possible. Information on its movement is being fed into a creative artificial intelligence that understands the goal. Our goal is to create a faster robot. You need an AI that can understand context. That's difficult. So when you look at these technologies, there is a huge amount of research and development that's gone into the back of these. This AI is running tens of thousands of simulations a minute to create robot version number 2. And the AI is running on a computer. We're not talking about a huge supercomputer. The AI designs robot version number 2, and that can apply to anything. This product could be anything with sensors in, doesn't matter what it is. Could be a plant. A 3D printer prints the robot off, and a human assembles all the parts. If you change this 3D printer for a 4D printer, where 4D is time, and we did this with MIT about 2 years ago now, what you have is you have a self-evolving robot that can manufacture itself on a 4D printer and walk off the printer. Think about the implication that this type of technology will have on product development times. You think of a product today, it takes ages to productize it and get it into the market. And I'll give you an example in a moment. So, giving you an example, Airbus are using these platforms. General Motors have just shaved £50,000 off the way to their cars. General Motors are going to be using these technologies to design their next generation of cars. Airbus basically are already using these technologies to help them design the A330 and the A380 as well as future aircraft. Under Armour basically recently used a creative AI basically to produce a sneaker called the Architect. You can buy it online, it's $300. Normally it would take Under Armour from concept to shelf about 18 months. They got an artificial intelligence to design the trainer, day 1. Day 2, because they decided they wanted to go and have some coffee. They 3D printed the trainer off in the back of a store. Concept to shelf with Under Armour went from 18 months to 2 days. They also use 3D printing, for example, in that case, to eliminate their global inventory. They can create personalized products. They don't need to manufacture out of China now. They don't need to ship 100 million trainers, basically, from China. So all of a sudden, logistics companies basically wonder what happened to their Under Armour business. Nike, Adidas are also doing that. NASA is also designing its latest rovers, basically using these creative machines as well. The time that it takes to go from concept to product, basically, is falling dramatically, both in hardware and software. Hardware is a bit easier, software is a little bit sort of further out. From a real estate perspective, though, these same AIs are now being used to design buildings, communities, and cities. They just crunch database and then they design these. So this is a parametric design, for example. I mean, it's just a sort of basic one. But this is where the artificial intelligence, basically, you set out the space parameters and it will just make optimal use of the space. The reason why I use this is because I don't have a video, basically, of an AI that's designing a city. And those ones are fairly new. So this is parametric design. So now what we do, basically from a real estate perspective, I have an artificial intelligence that can help me design a building, a community, and/or a city. And then I take that design, like I did with the robot, and I 3D print an entire community down in South America in 1 day. This is not the only one. We have these in Paris, we have these in Holland, we have them in America and Ukraine. We have these in Australia. We have them in China. The cost of building one of these, or you can build a 4-bedroom house now, basically in France, for $24,000. You can 3D print it in about 24 hours. The US military are 3D printing barracks in 8 hours. And then they demolish them, reconstitute all the material, because you don't have to use concrete. You can use green concrete if you like, which eliminates 10% of global greenhouse gas emissions because we get rid of Portland cement. But you can use plastics, you can use any type of material, provided it's compatible basically with, durability, and it's compatible with the printers. And then over in Dubai, we've set a goal basically that by 2030, 25% of all Dubai's new builds will be 3D printed. In 2021, we've signed a memorandum of understanding to 3D print an 80-story skyscraper. And if you go to Dubai, about 2% of current buildings basically are now 3D printed, and Sheikh Mo basically wants to increase that 2% by a couple of percent each year basically in order to hit his goal in 2030. But remember, these technologies get faster and better. The regulators basically start approving them. You need processes around these. We don't just take a technology and print a house. We need to make sure that the materials are safe, that health and safety is checked. Basically, we need to make sure that all the regulations basically have been approved. And increasingly, regulators are actually signing off on this stuff, which then allows us to go off and do stuff. However, we're going to exponentially accelerate from here. So, for example, we can now train our artificial intelligences 100 million times faster because of this.
It's not rendered by a graphics engine. It's actually rendered by the AI technology that we built.
This is video to virtual reality in real time.
This is the first time we combine machine learning and computer graphics to do image generation using deep networks.
For training data, we're given some driving sequences of different cities, and then we use another segmentation network to extract the high-level semantics from these sequences. We have the UE4 engine to generate these colorized high-level layouts. Different objects were given different colors.
The network converts this representation to images.
That would take an entire team months, if not years, to create these worlds.
I made my co-author to dance Gangnam Style, which I don't think he would do by himself.
we find some good dancing videos from another person, and then use my model to synthesize the dance move. That was created by machines. It's not me.
So again, from an artificial intelligence perspective, if you think deepfakes, we now start accelerating deepfakes out. One of the reports basically that I've recently put together is for Disney, because Disney, as well as Netflix and Sky, basically want something called procedural content. Ultimately, that's where you push a big green magic artificial intelligence button and you produce a Marvel blockbuster movie, basically just like that. In order to get to the point where we can use these machines to create synthetic content, which is already here, you need about 30 different AI disciplines to come together. So again, you've got to have the technologies, you've got to then integrate them. So for example, if you want to create a movie using artificial intelligence, the AI needs to know what is a story, what is a good story, what is perspective, what's tempo. Because if you create a Marvel movie, basically, and everyone's talking at 3,000 miles an hour, that's useless. It needs to understand natural language, tone, intonation, emotions, and everything else. So you take AIs that have all these different disciplines nailed, then you combine them. You create the world's first really, really bad movie, and everyone goes, that's a bad movie. You should put that in the bin. You then perfect the technology by saying number 2 is a bit better, number 3 is better, and number 4, by number 4 and 5, you're starting to get to the point where you have some really good movies. And for example, if you've watched The Lion King recently, if you've got kids, all of that was filmed in virtual reality. So when I went out to the studios, basically, they literally created everything in virtual reality. The Oscars don't know how to classify that. So it was created in virtual reality using an artificial intelligence system like that one, and then the cameraman would just literally kneel down with a fake camera with motion capture suits on, basically in virtual reality headsets, and film Simba. So these same technologies are disrupting the entire media and entertainment industry. We have virtual reality pop stars, and we actually have regular pop stars now that have been signed up by Warner Brothers and Sony. So there's an artificial intelligent musician called Endel, which has just been signed up for 20 deals, or 20 albums by Warner. So what we do here, though, basically, is we take these virtual reality worlds, basically, which look like they're sort of fairly interesting, but who kind of cares? And now we can start putting artificial intelligence models in those VR worlds and training them hundreds of millions of times faster than we were able to do beforehand. I'll give you an example. Again, OpenAI, they took a simple robotic hand. Everyone sort of says that trying to create a dexterous robot is difficult, but they took a relatively basic robotic hand. They simulated it in a simulated environment. They applied 800 years of training to that robotic hand. After about a week, that robotic hand, basically, not only is the world's most dexterous robotic hand, it can solve a Rubik's Cube in a couple of minutes with one hand. Can you do that with your hand? Arguably, we now have a robotic hand that is more dexterous than a human hand, obviously at certain tasks. But that was 800 years worth of artificial intelligence training crammed into a week. So we think everything's moving quickly today. Everything's accelerating much faster than you think. And then as for the next 30 years of AI, well, frankly, basically, if you have children, this is the world basically that they're going to be exposed to, and industrial age education systems basically are not preparing them. Just going to put that out there. So we have quantum artificial intelligence, which is coming through now. So quantum computers are about 100 to 200 million times more powerful than today's computers. So these are great at optimization problems. If you want to model proteins and drugs and all that kind of stuff, quantum computers are fantastic. So coming 2025, 2030, we should start seeing some new drug discoveries. Bearing in mind that artificial intelligence has already created artificial genomes and artificial or synthetic drugs. Some of the drugs and vaccines that it's produced are now being trialed on humans in Australia. Lucky them. We have neuromorphic computers. So neuromorphic computers are essentially self-learning computers. So I mentioned that one earlier. We also have printed AI. Do you ever think you could print an artificial intelligence? They're completely passive. They don't use any power at all, but you can 3D print an artificial intelligence. That's always a sort of slightly weird concept. If you want to go and do that yourselves, by the way, you can go to Caltech, have a look at the RVICs, basically, and you can go and print your own artificial intelligence at home. We also have DNA-based artificial intelligence. So we've recently had a couple of universities that created complex neural networks out of DNA. So on the one hand, do you think AI is always going to be binary and digital as we see it today? It's not. However, taking this one step further, we recently managed to use that same gene editing technology I mentioned earlier to turn human cells into dual-core computers. We also managed to get human cells to run 2 genetic codes. In addition to that, when we actually talk about DNA, all of us share something in common with the first amoeba and the dinosaurs. Our DNA basically is 4 letters long, or 4 letters, well, that's 4 base pairs. Over in the US, as well as China and over in Singapore, they've created DNA with 6 letters and 8 letters. The future of computing, by the way, is biological. Over in China, we're now on the 5th generation biological computer, thanks to Huawei, where you can store information into a bacteria, like a video, and replay it. So we actually have a pathway, and that's a whole different conversation. We actually have a pathway now to turn humans into DNA-based and/or biological supercomputers, where, for example, you could identify blood biomarkers basically going around in your blood, and your body could start synthesizing the drug. So if you think you're only ever going to be human in 50 years' time, the technologies for this are already here. But the regulators, you can imagine the regulators, if you go to a regulator and say, I'd like to turn a person into a supercomputer, they'll freak out. So that's what holds it down. So all these technologies are rocket ship all the way over there. Regulators are the people who are on a broken bicycle over there. Hive minds. When we start connecting all of these different devices up together, so if I connect a self-driving car in Japan to a cloud with AI, any other car, basically, that's plugged into that cloud now can share its experiences. We have hive minds. So what a connected device on one side of the planet experiences or learns can now be experienced and learnt by every other billions of devices all over the planet. So, for example, with Google, you train one robot to do one thing, it teaches the rest of the fleet. Accelerates the rate of innovation and change again. We also used hive minds recently to connect up 2 rats on different continents. So we taught one rat, basically in South America, how to navigate a maze, connected their minds together using brain-machine interfaces. Those were invasive BMIs. And the rat, basically over in New York, knew how to navigate the maze the first time. And then from a human perspective, we increasingly have telepathy. So as we start unlocking the human mind, over in 2015, Harvard managed to get telepathic communication going between 2 people at a basic level. About a year ago, 3 people managed to play telepathic Tetris. So again, we're unlocking not just one, but we're unlocking the secrets of the mind. And artificial intelligence can be used across all of these. And then we have artificial general intelligence, which is a game changer. Most people estimate that'll be here by about 2035, although we have Google Impala, which is an artificial intelligence that can do about 30 different things, because today most AIs can only do one thing really well. AGI is like human intelligence, basically, that can just do lots of things really well, because obviously we can. And then last one, sort of kind of 2047 is the general consensus. Artificial superintelligence. In the words of Elon Musk, artificial superintelligence basically will all make us look like the equivalent of pet cats to ASI. ASI, most people think by this point, these superintelligences will be able to solve death, interstellar travel, fusion, cold fusion, energy problems, and all that sort of stuff. So the future is bright. The future is definitely intelligent. Hopefully, basically, we're in that mix. And as we start having a look at the future is increasingly fast and furious. I would all encourage you, basically, to go out and explore. There is lots that's happening. There is lots that is having an impact, basically, on your own industry, on your own portfolios, on your own personal lives. But if you have children, just imagine your children's future, where I'm talking by 2047, we have an ASI. I'm talking where in 2019 we have biological computers, where in 2020 Microsoft will let you store information in DNA in its Azure cloud if you're special. If you think about this basically from your children's perspective, how prepared are they? So I would encourage you, for your sake, as well as for their sake, go and explore. There's loads and loads of opportunities. There's loads of great stuff out there. And thank you very much for your time, and enjoy the rest of the day.
Thank you very much, Matthew. I have to, I'm reading lots and lots of questions because I have no AI doing this for me. And I'll just pick the first one because they're all very good. We're not all scientists, so what are we supposed to do in this future?
That's a good question. So on the one hand, basically, when we have a look at artificial intelligence, the European Union put out a report last year saying that artificial intelligence and automation will affect every single strata of European society. They also formally recommended that all 28 member states looked at universal basic income. Now, on the one hand, basically, from an automation perspective, you can see automation as a threat because it'll automate jobs, and it will. We've always seen job automation. However, you can also see this as an opportunity because all of the technologies that I've been talking about, they are increasingly accessible, democratized, cheap. If you want to go and access the world's most powerful artificial intelligence, download it for free from Google. So now, what happens, for example, with creativity? If you wanted to start a business 20 years ago, basically you'd need a big team and everything else. But increasingly in this future, you'll be able to, the AIs basically will be able to write programs. You'll be able to create content basically in new ways. There's loads and loads of opportunities. But again, how you see this future very much depends on your point of view. If you look at the future and you look at it as a threat, you're going to end up basically in the nut house, because there's lots of threats. If you look at it as an opportunity, basically, where all these technologies are helping you democratize and do new things, save the planet, find a purpose, basically help you express your creativity, build a business, scale a business, whatever it happens to be, there's a huge amount of opportunity out there. So it's a mindset.
What are we supposed to do to prepare our kids for this future? Because you said in school they're not going to learn this. We know that. We didn't learn anything in school about today, especially about the technology. But what can we do?
So I have two young children. They're 5 and 7. When I was selecting a school for them, basically I went around all the schools and said, okay, what are you preparing my children for? What future are you preparing them for? And the headmasters and mistresses of private and state schools basically came and said, well, doctors, lawyers, accountants, all kind of usual thing. All of them are being automated and changing. We have a significant problem when it comes to education. We have industrial education systems today, basically, that if you have a look at the Starburst, for example, or the Codex, so I talk about following 400 exponential technologies. The best schools today are talking about 9. They are doing even less. How many of the schools that your children are going to basically are teaching them robotics? And if they're teaching them robotics, you know, this is what a robot is, this is how it works, this is how you build one. Understanding those principles is fine. I've just shown you a self-evolving, self-manufacturing robot. That's from 2 years ago. When your children come out of school and go, I want to be a robot, I want to be a robot designer, these things will be mature. So what we have is we have industrial age education systems. We have a fast and furious future that we can envision because we can track all the bits and pieces. We have a huge gap in the middle. If I said to you, where would your children go to go and experience the future, get a point of view, at least get excited about it, where someone can say, right, you know, this is what this is how we could solve global hunger, basically. This is what an evolving robot is or does. These are biological computers. Where do they go? The general answer across Europe is nowhere. So over in the UK, basically, we ran a forum, the first World Futures Forum, because we're changing how we educate 10 million children basically around Germany, UAE, Canada, the US, and the UK now. We're building X Labs. The piece in the middle doesn't exist. But then we also have that other problem of, if I say to you the future, say for example in 30 years' time, your children could be using synthetic biology to program a biological computer, You sort of go, okay, great, I think that's a job for them. I'd like them to be in that world. Where are the teachers? It's not one problem, it's multiple problems. There are no teachers, basically. If you go and put this in front of teachers, and I've done this in front of multiple schools, and the first question teachers go is, who's going to teach us this stuff? So if you don't have teachers who understand the future, if you don't have teachers who actually at least have some skills, the rest falls down. And as for the cost, basically, of educating children about the future, or at least exposing them to it, show them a YouTube video, get a whiteboard. You can do it at home and say, so, son, daughter, if robots could evolve themselves, what do you think that would mean? What could you do? What if an artificial intelligence basically was DNA or organic? What would that mean? One of the organizers earlier basically said that her little brother basically asked her about space elevators. There is no such thing basically as a stupid question. Space elevators, the Japanese are trialing space elevators basically between 2 satellites at the moment. So explore. This is sort of why I say explore. You've got 2 types of education. You've got the formal education system. If you can't fix that, or it takes a long time to fix, and we are trying to fix it, you've got the informal education system. Because if teachers aren't teaching you about the latest in AI or robotics or synthetic biology or nanotech or whatever it happens to be, bearing in mind this is just scratching the surface, I can show you molecular assemblers as well. There's an informal network. You go outside the formal school system. So we're going outside the formal school system, the schools are noticing, and then they're going, how do we build X labs, and how do we actually have a futures lab, and what is a futures lab, and how do we build a future-proof curriculum? But then from an examination perspective, your children sit down, they take exams basically in the same old way, on the same old stuff. You've got to get the governments involved. Basically, you have to get the regulators and the certification and the examination boards involved. It's not one thing, it's 100 things. And we are starting to change it, but it's the more help, the better.
So, in a nutshell, if I take my iPhone away from my 3-year-old while he's taking pictures because he figured it out himself, I'm being an idiot.
Not necessarily. So my children play out and about and everything else. They have to have a good level of technology exposure. But nevertheless, basically with a lot of if you go and download the codex, so for example, molecular assemblers, that's a fun one. Neurobiotics are conscious robots. You can literally just introduce questions to your children. So they need to be exposed to technology, but not overexposed. Because increasingly, as we start talking about an increasingly automated world, one of the things that's going to make us special, basically, as humans, is our humanity. Your children need to be able to have empathy. They need to have morals and ethics. They're going to have access to incredibly powerful technologies that could save lives or destroy lives. They need to be resourceful. They need to be entrepreneurial. So again, actually on the website, there's a Future of Education 2020 to 2070 codex, which is free. I mean, feel free to download that. That was picked up by 4 governments. So there are things that we can do. I mean, say, for example, I went back in time now, and I said, I've got perfect knowledge of 2019, and I know we need cybersecurity experts. I go back to the 1980s, and I sit down basically with the world's leaders and go, we need cybersecurity experts. And they go, what's that? And I say, well, cybersecurity expert is kind of like a policeman for the internet, protecting people and assets basically across the internet. Can you imagine the next question? The teachers go, what's the internet? And I go, so the internet basically is this thing basically that connects 3.5 billion people, has transformed global society, business, and culture. At what point do you think those teachers or those governments basically go, Matt, you're a feckin' idiot, and kick me out? Do you think they'd have changed the curriculums? No, we'd still be like this. And when we ran the World Futures Forum, we had 2 government ministers there, and they said, we were talking about this stuff 30 years ago, and nothing's changed. If the governments don't change something, frankly, change it yourself. And that's what we're trying to do. And it's not easy, and it galls me, frankly, that I should even be in a position where I've got to think about creating something outside of formal education for my own children. But I know, because I do this for a living, that their world basically their world's going to be zany. If you have a look at the number of people basically who are being made redundant now, let alone when we get to AGI in 2035, and that starts getting embedded into digital society, autonomous companies, how do you deal with that?
There is so many questions coming in, and you touched so many subjects, so I apologize if I cannot ask them all. I can ask 2 more.
Yeah, no.
What about, the fakes? digital fakes, AI fakes. We already see this with the deep fake thing. There is like a case to be made that if I'm the president of the United States, I don't need to trouble myself doing a speech on my own, right? I can let AI, I can put the text, AI does it, fine, I can do other things. But how do we deal with, fake information and how do we even know?
So that's a big struggle basically for everybody. Yesterday basically I was doing a keynote for Episerver in Helsinki on the future of content and creativity, and we actually went through all of this. So on the one hand, again, basically from your perspective and your children's perspective, what we have is we have increasingly powerful artificial intelligent tools that are increasingly good at creating something called synthetic content. So synthetic audio, which is songs and voices that sound real, that pass uncanny valley. Static 2D images, 3D images, so deepfake basically is kind of that 3D image. Now, on the one hand, basically, we can try to capture it. So, for example, if you have a look at today's deepfakes, even the more convincing ones, you can run an artificial intelligence program over the top of them. And when you're videoing people, people's skin flushes. So we can figure out that a deepfake is fake because when somebody's talking, when, say, for example, you've got a fake Donald Trump talking, his skin doesn't flush. But you end up with a cat and mouse game because the people who create the synthetic content go, right, the way that you're finding our synthetic content is by looking for skin flushes. So we'll introduce fake skin flushes. And off you go. So it's a cat and mouse game. You will get to the point basically where you will not be able to trust any of the information that you see at all. It's a massive problem for the investment community. It's a massive problem for democracies and everything else. On the one hand, basically, there's education, but the only type of fix basically is technology and technology done at scale. But while Facebook can implement one thing today, and that will catch a bunch of deep fakes, if you're on things like TikTok, if you're on different social media networks that aren't using some of the latest tools, you won't know. I mean, just like I say, basically with Disney, yesterday I played a video basically of a pop star. She's had 500 million YouTube views. She's been signed by Sony. If you watch it, it just looks like a 3-minute pop star video. It's an AI. It's fooled generals in the past. So synthetic content, so to put it into perspective, 3 years ago, if you wanted to create a deep fake, you needed a team of artificial intelligence experts who knew what they were doing, and they'd take about a year, and they'd have huge amounts of compute. And they'd produce a deep fake that you'd go, that looks rubbish. This year, a Chinese app called Zhao put deepfake technology for free basically into an app. And all you do is you scan your face with a phone, and you just pick which Leonardo DiCaprio movie you want to appear in. So from bleeding edge technology in a lab done by experts to free on the internet. And ironically, the businesses and companies who are advising the European Union at the moment, I saw one of them in Romania, are using my content, and the content they're using to teach the EU is about 2 years out of date. So the EU has no idea. Deepfakes is a fun conversation.
For EU standards, that's still pretty recent.
Yeah.
The last question, I'll combine it. You talked about AIs as dictators.
Yeah.
So can you expand on this? Because how can we even prevent this?
Yeah.
And then as a next step, the Terminator question.
Oh,
what if the computers decide we don't need any humans anymore and kill us off?
So, Terminators and things. Fun facts. Okay, we'll take the Terminator one first. Okay, so what we have is today we have a humanoid robot called Atlas. You can look up the YouTube videos and things. It's very dexterous. It can do backflips and parkour and all that sort of stuff. We can already 3D print human skin because we can 3D print human organs and bone and cartilage and all sorts of stuff. So the university, when you 3D print human skin, one of the problems that you have is when you transplant it onto a patient who's got a burn, it's not stretched. So you need something to stretch it. So Oxford University 3D printed real human skin that has follicles, feeling, it's tactile, it's human skin, it's from stem cells. Put it onto a robot. So you actually, technically, from a robot perspective, you have human, like the Terminator, you have real human skin on top of a metal endoskeleton. So that's that one. You connect robots basically up to hive minds and all that sort of stuff. and we're already doing that, so Google are doing that. So you teach one robot one thing, and it teaches the rest of them whatever it wants to teach them. We have polymorphic materials. So if you know the T-1000, it comes out of the ground. Or, you know, he's just like a sort of pool of metal, and he rises up and is a shape-shifting robot. Scientists in China recently created a polymorphic material that does that. So it's magnetic-based, and it can form lots of different shapes. So I've got that kind of thing coming through. Hunter-killer robots, the US Marines want to create fully autonomous, what they call fully autonomous kill chains. We think Russia's actually just accomplished this. So we have fully autonomous AI-driven drones and robots, basically, that are now able to identify targets and basically kill whatever the target is. So we have fully autonomous kill chains. That's the military term, because I work in the military spaces as well. So Terminator, we've got all the bits that we need for the Terminator. If you then think Skynet, because we need a big brain in the sky, the US Department of Defense is creating a single artificial intelligence that can monitor the entire world for threats, and then analyze those threats and then figure out what they mean. So that's kind of your Skynet analogy. On the robo-hacker side, though, the US Pentagon recently put a fully autonomous artificial intelligent robo-hacker. So this is robo-hackers are artificial intelligences that can scan 100 million lines of code, identify exploits or bugs in the code, and either fix them or exploit them, get into the system. The US military recently put one called Mayhem, you can't make the name up, Mayhem, into this Pentagon's mission-critical systems to defend the mission-critical systems. So what you have is you have Skynet is increasingly coming together. You have humanoid robots with human skin on them connected to hive minds. If you use 3D printing and 4D printing technology, you now have an AI basically that can design the robot and then 3D print it off somewhere, or 4D print it off so it just walks off. We have polymorphic materials, and if you go onto my websites and things, in fact, in that codex again, in the materials section, you can literally see a video of the polymorphic materials where it's just a pool of goo and it starts doing all sorts of weird stuff. And then from an immortal dictator perspective, you can kind of think of that as Skynet. So say, for example, in China, basically China are joining up all of their systems. They're essentially doing that. So they're joining all their systems together. They're spending about $300 billion basically to become the leader in artificial intelligence. And what they're doing is they're using an artificial intelligence system to promote what we call the social credit score. So this social credit score, if you litter, so if you're a Chinese citizen and you litter, the CCTV cameras will see that you litter. It'll use facial recognition, tag that it's you that's just littered, and it will dock your credit score, your social credit score. You do enough bad things, and you are now banned from attending particular schools, broadband, healthcare and financial services, transportation services. So if you look up Chinese social credit scoring system, that's a fun one. Now you take the humans out of the loop and you hand that over to an artificial intelligence, and the artificial intelligence can simply set the rules and say, by the way, you have to vote for me, you have to behave in these ways, and if you don't, I will ban you from access, basically, from the trains, because you won't be able to get through the gates, from flight, whatever it happens to be. It's all an evolution. But in my chair, I can see everything building up already, which is one of the other worries, basically, that I have for my children, because all of these are powerful technologies. We've already got some of the Chinese technologies already being exported. We've got dictators. If you look at Iran, increasingly they're using digital technologies to they're just killing off the internet, that sort of stuff. These technologies give each of us as an individual a huge amount of power. But if you're a dictator, you have a huge amount of power as well to control entire societies and civilizations, which is why from a Western perspective, as well as a global perspective, it is incredibly important that we have the right governments and leaders in place, basically, and that we actually keep our freedoms and our democracies. I travel around the world, basically, and it is absolutely stark to me the difference between me being able to stand on stage and saying, I don't like this politician, and me being in another country and saying, I don't like the prime minister of this country, and suddenly being banned. Freedom of expression, freedom of speech, democracy is incredibly important. You have to protect it.
Well, when I came to stage, I was excited and scared. Now I'm only scared. Thank you for expanding also on the defense industries. This was also a question. Matthew, thank you so much. Applause, please. Thank you very much.
Cheers.